Great. Well, welcome everybody to the second Metamorphosis talk hosted by the East-West Psychology Department. And we're very honored to be celebrating a new book that has been edited by Robert and Debashish. And we're going to have a conversation about that. I'm going to hand it over to my co-hosts here, Stefan Julich, to introduce Robert and Debashish.
So, hi everyone, and thank you, Jonathan. And excuse me for reading, but I want to get this right. Robert McDermott is President Emeritus and Professor of Philosophy and Religion with the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program here at CIIS. He's taught at Manhattanville College in Purchase, New York, and the Bernard M. Baruch College in New York City, where he is Professor Emeritus and former chair of the Department of Philosophy. Robert's publications include Radhakrishnan, The Essential Aurobindo, The Essential Steiner, and the New Essential Steiner, an introduction to Rudolf Steiner for the 21st century. The Bhagavad Gita and the West, the esoteric significance of the Bhagavad Gita and its relation to the epistles of Paul, and Steiner and Kindred Spirits. His essays on such figures as William James, Josiah Royce, Mahatma Gandhi, among others, have appeared in various journals, including the International Philosophical Quarterly, Cross Currents, the Journal of the American Academy of Religion, and Philosophy East and West. Robert was also with Andrew Harvey, the director of the 1991 conference, The Renaissance of the Sacred Feminine, that was sponsored by CIIS and Quest Grace Cathedral Center for Spiritual Wholeness. And I've discovered that the audio for this conference is still available through conferencerecordings.com for anyone who's interested, along with recordings of other CIIS events throughout the years. Among his many other accomplishments, Robert has served as president of the board of the New York Center for Anthroposophy, president of the Rudolf Steiner Summer Institute, as co-founder of the Owen Barfield Graduate School at Sunbridge College, secretary of the American Academy of Religion, secretary-treasurer of the Society for Asian and Comparative Philosophy, director of a National Endowment for the Humanities Project for the review of audiovisual materials for the study of Hinduism and Buddhism, and is also founding chair of the board of the Sophia Project for mothers and children at risk of homelessness. On a personal note, it would be impossible for me to overstate the importance Robert has had in my own intellectual and even personal development. We first met in 1981. That's easy math for me, it's 40 years, at a lecture that Robert gave on Steiner and the evolution of consciousness at the New York Open Center. His warmth, his wit, and his skill as a lecturer were on full display that night, and as a result of that first meeting, I became a regular at the New York branch of the Anthroposophical Society, taking numerous courses with Robert and others, and becoming a serious student of anthroposophy for many years. In the 1990s, when he was president of CIIS, Robert told me about the Institute, and I determined to come. Once here, as well as earning my PhD in East-West psychology, I had the honor of attending numerous classes, presentations, and talks given by Robert. He has been an almost continuous presence and positive influence in my life for 40 years. It was at CIIS that I discovered the mother, who has become my own spiritual teacher and Sophianic figure. And it was through my dissertation research on her that I was introduced to Debashish, who at the time was an adjunct in Asian and comparative studies. Debashish Banerji has served as professor of Indian studies and dean of academics at the University of Philosophical Research, Los Angeles, taught as adjunct faculty at Pasadena City College and at the University of California, Irvine. He's curated numerous exhibitions of Indian and Japanese art and has authored and edited books and art catalogs on major figures of the Bengal Renaissance, such as Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore and artist Abindranath Tagore and Sri Aurobindo. He has also written extensively on critical posthumanism, yoga psychology, and on a variety of creative and art-related subjects. His most recent books are 7 Quartets of Becoming, a transformational psychology based on the diaries of Sri Aurobindo, Meditations on the Isha Upanishad, tracing the philosophical vision of Sri Aurobindo, Integral Yoga Psychology, Metaphysics and Transformation as taught by Sri Aurobindo, and is currently the Haridas Chaudhry Professor of Indian Philosophies and Cultures and the Doshi Professor of Asian Art at the California Institute of Integral Studies. For those who would like to hear more about this book, after this evening, Debashish has spoken about it in an interview with Jeffrey Mishlove on his new Thinking Aloud, that I believe is available on YouTube. Debashish could tell us now, or at least it will be very soon, under the title Global Goddess Traditions with Debashish Banerji. And to offer a personal reflection on Debashish, he was aware of my interest in the mother and Sri Aurobindo while I was working on my dissertation, and I had the good fortune to speak with him on a few occasions about them. He invited me to come teach a course on Jung at the University of Philosophical Research in 2014, I think, thereabout, and asked me to contribute a chapter on Jung and Sri Aurobindo for his book, Integral Yoga Psychology. When Debashish called me to ask if I would like to come back to work under him in East West, I jumped at the opportunity. Of course, his intellectual and intuitive brilliance are evident to any who have had the opportunity to hear him speak or to have read his writings. His generous and collaborative approach as my supervisor has given me the extraordinary opportunity to give back to the institute that has given me so much, as Debashish has allowed me to teach classes here and has also generously included me in the book whose publication that we are here to celebrate. So I just want to close by saying that I owe my being here and being as involved in the school as I am to both of these gentlemen, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank them here for all that they've done for me personally. Jonathan?
Thanks, Stefan. I'd just like to start by introducing the book and reading a couple short sections from it and sort of contextualizing the form of our talk tonight. I'd like to start reading from the foreword, which is written by Christopher Bamford. Quote, "In the beginning was Sophia, and Sophia was wisdom, and wisdom was in the beginning. A goddess, a presence, a being. She made the world fertile, female, a safe place to be. This then is a first insight. If the ego self is aside, approached without expectation, creation, the world, the very cosmos itself reveals itself as the living mirror or immanent twin of Sophia, the living presence of love, life, and wisdom. From this point of view, we might call the whole world, including the world of matter, the palace of divine wisdom," end quote. In the introduction to the book, written by Debashish and Robert, it introduces the divine feminine in relation to the epistemic conditions of our times and contemporary forces of globalized neoliberal capitalism in the age of the Anthropocene. As Robert says, quote, "The monotheism of the three patriarchal religions has led to the situation today where the earth is no longer viewed as sacred, and we are confronted with the catastrophic effects of the loss of the divine feminine," end quote. Debashish asks in the afterword, what's the use of philosophy which cannot confront questions and forces unique to our times? Quote, "Philosophy is worth very little if it cannot help us in answering this crisis. Philosophy is to be meaningful. It must shed its rational superiority and alienation from life and enter the trenches of the lived crisis. It must become a living existential force and an immanent thought in action. We who have woken to this crisis must become the conscience of our time, and philosophy must be our living guide and constant companion," end quote. This book challenges modernity's hegemonic colonization of the life world through an absolute logocentric or phalogocentric epistemology as part of the ontotheological traditions. Instead, it offers immanent relational, embodied, and earth-based practices which focus on multiplicity, integration, and transition. Here is another quote from Debashish, which describes it in a beautifully integral perspective. Quote, "Prevalent along these tropes of integration and transition was a return of the goddess from her long repression by an androcentric social ontology marked by rational subjectivity, philosophy, property ownership, economics, politics of truth, ideology, and exploitation of the life world, colonization, manifesting in heterogeneity, relationality, intimacy, jouissance, and unity that does not erase multiplicity. The divine feminine is the catalyst and agent for the knowledge that is one with love and action that can express itself performatively in the dance of integrality. I'd like to ask Stefan now to introduce the scholars and some of the essays that are part of this volume.
Sorry. Thanks, Jonathan. We wanted to point out that CIS is continuing to be a role model in the scholar-practitioner model of scholarship, and 11 of the 13 essayists, including the editors, are connected to CIS and writing as scholar-practitioners, so we wanted to name them. Mark Andrus, his chapter on Mary, Mother of God and Prophet. My chapter on the incarnation of Sophia and the work of C.G. Jung. Will Keepen, A Secret So Sacred It Cannot Even Be Whispered, The Wisdom and Bliss of the Divine Feminine in Interspirituality. Marilyn Keller, Holy Lady Wisdom in Anatolia, Land of the Mothers. Olga Provencher, The Flaming Feminine, Sophia in Russian Spirituality and Art. Nila Bhattacharya Saxena, who is a visiting professor at EWP, Waking Up in the Lap of Mahaprajna, Kali as a Wisdom Deity in Tantric Texts and Bengali Shyama songs. Jacob Sherman, Mary, Seat of Wisdom. Jun Wang, Dynamic Wisdom of Sky Dancers in Tantric Buddhism. And Annette Williams, Wisdom of the Primordial Feminine, Wisdom of Women, Odu Ifa and Yoruba Religious Tradition. Jonathan?
So the book is broken into different sections, which is going to serve as a general form for the talk. The sections are Sophia in the ancient Mediterranean world, Sophia in Christianity, wisdom goddesses in Asia and West Africa, contemporary approaches to Philo-Sophia. So Stefan and I will ask questions along these lines. And because there are so many of you attending, we will open up for questions after the talk, that this portion of the talk is over. So you can raise your hand using the function, the reaction function in the bottom bar, or type your question in a chat and we can moderate the discussion after we close the formal part of the book talk. So I'd like to start by asking Robert and Debashish about sort of how this work came to be, and especially about the title of the project, being Philo-Sophia, Wisdom, Goddess Traditions. I'd like to actually also ask, using a quote here, the kind of wisdom that we're going to be talking about tonight. And this is a quote from Debashish in the end of his first part of the introduction. Wisdom in all these cases is not restricted to a mental understanding, but can awaken in the heart as emotional knowledge, or as a visionary will, or as a practical intuition in action. Or wisdom can be collective, available in attuned councils of the elders or of the commons, or as in the case with varieties of Buddhism and Shakta Tantra, it can be a thoughtless perception of paradoxical truth. In all these cases, wisdom comes as a gift through openness to the grace of goddess powers of becoming, active in the flow of time. So the question that I have is, how did you come to this title of Philo-Sophia, and what does it mean in relation to wisdom?
Debashish, it was your title. So
yeah, it was my title, Robert, but I wanted to sort of first mention that it came about because of you, and you approached me at a certain point. You were writing a book on Sophia, and you had some partners, collaborators You ran into some difficult waters. We talked about it, and you were thinking of abandoning it. And I said, why don't we do this project? And I think that was the beginning of this project. And the title, I think we went back and forth on the title a little bit. But we settled on this title, Robert. Philo-Sophia, in the sense that, firstly, love of the goddess wisdom, goddess of wisdom. I think Robert was writing a book called The Mystery of Sophia or something like that, right, Robert? You want to say a few words about it?
Because I'm so influenced by William James, I was calling it Varieties of Sophianic Experience. And
That's
one of the people who asked me to work with her on her work on Sophia is on this call, Jessica. So thank you, Jessica, for giving the initial start. Go ahead, Debashish.
I think that's good. Philo-Sophia, love of the goddess of wisdom. I think we wanted to highlight that fact that philosophy has moved very far away from that concept. And we wanted to highlight it by pointing it out in that sort of manner. And also, I think the idea of the hint of the plural, Philo-Sophia, many kinds of philosophy ideas through the many goddesses of wisdom. So I think this is why we settled on this particular title.
Yeah, but I thank you, Debashish, for bringing Sophia and philosophy itself closer together than it was in my own thinking. I have a PhD in philosophy, and I've been teaching philosophy for decades, but I hadn't really worked at integrating Sophia with philosophy the way you had. Now, of course, we've been working together for 2 or 3 years, and it's completely taken hold. But you were the first one to speak those words in a way that was quite exciting and enlightening for me. I should say to anybody who's listening, we come from very different backgrounds. I could go on about that. And we have never had a disagreement. Lots of people who write books together end their friendship or their divorce or whatever. But we have worked in a completely harmonious, complementary way. It's really been a great treat. I was thinking of us, Debashish, the other night when Jake and I were interviewing Bishop Mark Andrus talk about the friendship of Martin Luther King and Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's a very different friendship from ours, but it had some of that magical complementarity that we've experienced.
Thank you, Robert. Maybe we can mention that we are moving on from this project. We've got a number of other projects cooking, to use Robert's term. We are co-authoring a book, but we are also now thinking of something that excites me a lot, the collected works of Haridas Chaudhuri. To round up this notion of Philo-Sophia, for a long time, I've been thinking about this. We've got a number of postmodern thinkers talking about the problems of metaphysics. Metaphysics itself, the end of metaphysics is something that is a theme in postmodern thought. And I was also discussing with Jonathan some of the work of the contemporary philosopher Francois Laruelle, who's talking about non-philosophy. And the whole notion of philosophy as a kind of heady enterprise, a map-making enterprise, a kind of representational enterprise, is something that has been seen as problematic in various ways in its political sense, as leading to fascisms of various kinds. So what do we do with this whole notion of thought, of wisdom? And we're going back in that sense to other kinds of wisdom that comes to us from deeper sources, that is not a kind of a control over the life world, or colonization of the life world, as Jonathan pointed out.
And Debashish, could I ask a question about the difference then between a map and a diagram? Because we could say that this representational idea of the map can be problematic if we don't see the potentials within it. Could you expand on that a little?
Yeah, there's the famous bumper sticker variety of this. The map is not the territory. But you see, the thing about when you're talking about maps and diagrams, I mean, maps are also the notion of cartography. Diagrams, maps, etc., can lend themselves to a very different understanding than what we think of through philosophy. Through philosophy, we are trying to create a static map, a dogmatic image of thought in that sense. But what philosophy can lend itself to, what map making can lend itself to, is practical enterprise. I mean, we need maps for specific purposes. We don't just build maps. We build maps because we want to go from place A to place B. And place B is not the same for you and I. We first have to have a goal of becoming. And maps arise due to that. So diagrams, you're using the term diagrams, I believe, in the sense in which Gilles Deleuze uses it. So cartographies are useful from that point of view. And I think we're talking about feminine wisdom in that same manner, that it is of the here and now. It belongs to our affirmation and acceptance and participation in the future of the earth.
We say about the here and now and also about the future, and yet there is also a history to the feminine, especially in Western culture, but probably worldwide. And this has to do with the historical suppression of the ancient earth goddess and its supplantation by the male sky gods. And Jonathan had shared a quote with me that we would like to read. This is, Debashish, this is from your introduction. Related to these antique roots of Sophia is the historical narrative of a peaceful, sedentary Eurasian civilization marked by gynocentric politics and theology, which was violently supplanted by androcentric, warring Indo-Europeans over a period starting around 4000 BCE. It is the latter that established the model of male-dominated culture that has become normalized in and as modernity. This narrative remains ideological and historically controversial for lack of conclusive evidence. At the same time, it's been a major source of inspiration for postmodern goddess movements that view themselves in the image of the return of the gynocentric civilizations of antiquity. And I just wanted to add that I'm teaching a course on magic this semester, Western magic this semester, and we're doing a few modules on Wicca. And this is really present in the Wiccan communities. And I have a few Wiccans in my class who are very articulate about just this. So we thought that maybe you could discuss this a little bit, since this is also present in the book.
I'll let Robert talk to it at least to start with.
I'm not able to talk about magic, but I am able to talk about the evolution of consciousness. Would that be okay, Steph?
Yeah, I was just bringing in an anecdote of what's present in the classroom, but please.
Okay. Well, the evolution of consciousness is throughout the book, but particularly, well, I guess everywhere, but maybe very especially in the beginning, partly because two of the three authors in the first section on the ancient goddesses, the two of them, Anne Baring and Jules Cashford, are the author of what I take to be the sort of the primary, foundational, most influential of all the books on Sophia, at least Sophia in the West, the myth of the goddess, evolution of an image. And then Marikella is the third essay and is very consonant with the work of Anne Baring and Jules Cashford. So let me say a little bit about the importance of the evolution of consciousness, first in that title, which has certainly had a huge impact on me and many other people I know. The conference that you mentioned, Steph, might have been 93, but in any case, Anne Baring came for that. And it was quite a treat. Book had just been published. In any case, I'd like you to look at the title of that book, The Myth of the Goddess. And this is a book, and for that matter, it's true of our book as well, that takes myth as not less true, but more true. It's foundational, it's archetypal, it's structural, it's deeper, and it can be lived off in a way that an intellectual assertion has built-in limitation. So that's a very important word. So it's the myth of the goddess, and it's a capital G goddess throughout. The goddess in that book, goddesses in that book are real. They're active, they're influential, they're accessible, and they're diverse. Now, they're only doing the West, but still, it's a 700-page book, and they do a fabulous discussion of the goddesses of the West. And Jules Cashford wrote the chapter on Isis in that book, but also wrote another chapter, a newer chapter, for our book. And it's really quite remarkable for people who haven't studied this material to then, for the first time, come to know something about Isis, a goddess who was for 3,000 years the primary goddess of the entire Mediterranean world, much longer than any other goddess in any tradition. I think that's true. Well, pretty close anyway, 3,000 years. And of course, it was then succeeded or supplanted, depending on your paradigm, by the West, and particularly by the Virgin Mary, who then you have to, at every point, you have to choose your terms in terms of your perspective. There's nothing about this study that isn't controversial, and in a kind of a good way. It's an active field. It's trying to come to clarity, to collaborative insights. In any case, those three chapters in our book are by three experts, and particularly Amar is influenced by Maria Gimbutas, and who is also clearly, obviously, an influence on Baring and Cashford. So it's right at the outset, we are introduced and taken through, and with some scholarly specificity, the laws of the earth goddesses, accessible and peaceful, and supplanted somewhere around the 10th or 12th century BC by sky gods, by male domination, by priests. And in some writing, this is really quite dramatically told. I once was teaching 10 women my age, and we read that chapter. Everybody in the room, without exception, was just furious, A, that this happened, and B, that they didn't know it. It's a very dramatic chapter. There isn't agreement about the extent to which that loss is the cause of the decimation or the disadvantage of the feminine. Or what I should say, I guess, is that even if we come to know these chapters and prize them, I personally am not certain that this would go a long way toward curing the injustice and the really the imbalance in our culture, because after all, the Catholic Church, with which I'm familiar, is very devoted to the Virgin Mary, but has a terrible record on women. And India is also devoted to the goddess and also has a terrible record on women. So it's complicated. I'm not saying it would have no effect. It would have an effect, but this whole topic of Sophia has so many parts to it that need our attention and need our collaboration. So that's what I wanted to say about that, though, that opening chapter.
Yeah, I'd like to say that, yes, you read a quote from me, and absolutely, that's true. The whole idea of the supplantation of the earth goddesses by the sky gods is talked about by Maria Gimbutas, but also by others like Mircea Eliade. Even to make the axiological distinction between sky gods and earth goddesses is an entire kind of construct that has some historical basis and has resulted in an understanding that we experience today. In archaeological fact, actually, Maria Gimbutas was an important figure in proposing the Aryan invasion in India, which is related to this thing about the horsemen who came from the north and created the Vedic civilization, supplanted the kind of Harappan civilization. Of course, the Harappan civilization was already a civilization. It wasn't a kind of a settlement. To what extent was it earth goddess following? We do have a whole lineage of figurines that of the earth, of the goddess that come all the way into India at that time. But the thesis of the abrupt change due to, riders who came with iron weapons has been problematized. Of course, there's an aspect to it which is orthodox, but I think even otherwise, the more mainstream scholars, after kind of many years, after about 100 years now of that proposal being sort of in the air, have not found archaeological evidence for this. And so the more kind of nuanced understanding of this in the Indian context is that of migration. So we talk about the Indo-European migration into India, and there is a supplantation that takes place, but it is a more gradual and more complex supplantation. So there is, on the one hand, like the essay by Neela Bhattacharya Saxena about the kind of, the tantric traditions which retain some of the earlier earth goddess, paradigms as against the Vedic or Brahminical constructs, which this axiology does apply over there. But there's also other complex things that happen. For example, there's an integration that takes place when we are talking about the earth goddesses and the sky gods. The Vedic tradition is not only about sky gods. Today, of course, I believe the corpus we have called the Veda is not necessarily the original corpus. So we have sky goddesses. The highest goddess in the Veda is Aditi, who is the undivided mother of the solar world. And the suns, S-U-N-S, are her sons, S-O-N-S, born from her head, just like, in a reversal, gender reversal, Athena is born from the head of Zeus. Here we have the sons born from the head of Aditi. And of course, there is one son who is born downward, and that is the earth. So it's an interesting, to this day, we have Vedic goddesses who are very important in India. Saraswati, who literally means she who flows. And the idea of becoming a goddess as the power, divinity in becoming. Lakshmi, who is known as Shri in the Atharva Veda, becomes a really important goddess. Some of her earliest imagery appears in the Buddhist context. So we have an integration that takes place between what we are calling the earth goddesses and the sky goddesses. And also we have an integration with the earth, the goddess traditions and the God traditions, but patriarchy exists nevertheless. I mean, this is not to condone or kind of wish away the fact that it does become a patriarchal culture over time.
You can see why hanging out with Debashish is extremely interesting and instructive. That's wonderful. Thank you, Debashish. Okay, one of you have another question?
Yeah. Well, just a quick follow-up before we move on to the next subject, but I appreciate, Debashish, especially when you kind of separated kind of the historical reality, which is there, difficult to ascertain sometimes, but it's definitely there, and oppression is real. The kind of suffering that has been visited upon women especially has been real throughout the ages. At the same time, there is this other component, which is the kind of psychological component, and the way in which these ideas kind of play out in extraordinarily complex ways, in very layered and textured ways throughout history, and the way that we read, that human beings have kind of read into these ideas, these kind of constantly morphing and evolving ideas, and created or generated mythologies that have extraordinary meaning and meaning for the cultures that they arise within, and then that meaning carries forward. And it just brought to mind, actually, when Robert, when you were talking, I was thinking about a quote from the Red Book where Elijah and Salome come to Jung, and I think it's Elijah who says to him, "You may call us symbols for the same reason that you call your fellow men symbols if you wish to, but we're just as real as your fellow men. You invalidate nothing and solve nothing by calling us symbols." That even though these ideas, these myths are kind of considered in a very particular way in terms of scholarship and academic thought, that they're real to us. They're real to the people within the cultures in which they arose, and they speak very much to the experience of these people. So I just wanted to appreciate that you're bringing in the complexity of it, that this is a really complex issue and very rich also vein to tap.
And we have many complex topics yet to talk about. So everything in the book is complex.
Jonathan?
Yeah, how about we continue on and we talk about the section of the book which feels the Christian continuance of Sophia. You mentioned some of the ancient Mediterranean goddesses, and it flows into the next part of the book with papers from Jake and Olga and Mark.
Right. Yeah, the first three essays are by women, and the next section, two are by men, one is by a woman. So I don't know how much attention to pay to that. I'm conscious of it, but I don't know what to make of it. So the first of these three is by Jake Sherman, who is a scholar of philosophy and theology and religion, particularly Christian. And his essay is on Mary, the seat of wisdom. And he, in this essay, he does what I was crediting Debashish for doing, namely showing the intimate relationship between Sophia the goddess and the Sophia part of philosophy as he practices it. And this is a perfect example of scholar practitioner in that he's writing out of his own thinking. I mean, it's steeped in texts and traditions and deep theological and philosophical reflection, but it also comes obviously out of his own experience as a thinker and author and as a teacher. So it's a very rich text. It uses medieval texts, and it brings it right up to date. And it says we need to do philosophy, which is wisdom. And to do that, we should be meditative, we should be intuitive, we should be humble, we should be reverent. and such that our thought comes from a combination of mind and heart, with positive implications for experience. So it's quite a rich, learned, and I would even say inspiring essay. The second essay in that section is by Olena or Olga Prochenko, who is writing on the Russian Sophiologists. Sometimes when people hear the name Sophia, that's the first thing they think of. Oh, the Russians. And they are truly extraordinary Sophiologists. It's just so deep in their psyche and in their spiritual life. Vladimir Soloviev and I always get the first names mixed up. I wrote it down. Oh, Pavel, of course. Pavel Florensky and Sergei Bulgakov. And marvelous to read. I recommend it. I'm sorry, I don't know Russian the way Olena does. But her essay is mostly about the art, the cathedrals and the very beautiful icons. And of course, if you don't know about icons, you need to know what goes into an icon. It's so amazing discipline and preparation. It's meditative. It really is meditative work. Not that the work of Raphael is not meditative. And Olena also has some reflections, opinions about the status of Sophia in this tradition, and she wishes that it would be more affirmative of the divinity and or the equal to Christ. And this is a theme that she's not making up. It's a theme in the Russian sociological tradition about just where to place the mother of Jesus. Jake doesn't talk so much about that, but Mark does. He's after all an Episcopal bishop, so he has to have settled somewhat what to say about is the mother of Jesus divine? Is she the mother of God, Theotokos, which was a definition coming out of the 4th century council. So Olena has an eye for that, which doesn't prevent her celebrating the beautiful Russian icons and the Russian art in the cathedrals. And then Mark starts right in saying that the Abrahamic religions have not been good for women. Patriarchy is very powerful. And so he sets out to try to show that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is a kind of a rule breaker. She's a boundary crosser. She's a prophetic figure. She has a strong feminine dimension, which is important for our own culture and our own individual lives. I don't know for certain exactly where he places her, and in a way, I think that whole question is a problem of the West, the general character of Western thought to be too defining and too schematic and too much either or. She's at this level or she's at that level, and kind of forgetting this is a mystery we're talking about. This is not, this is not like grading papers. This is very profound and complicated. So all three of those essays, I think, are really quite wonderful, very different from each other, and I am sure you'll enjoy them.
Jonathan, should I move on? So the next section that we wanted to talk about were non-Western wisdom goddesses. Goddess lineages of power and wisdom in India, collective wisdom in Africa, wisdom goddesses in Asia, and also West Africa.
Yes, so yeah, this section actually features 3 essays. The first one is by Annette Williams, Chair of Women's Spirituality. She's here today. And it'll be great to ask her some questions afterwards. So she's talking about Nigeria, so the traditions of the Yoruba, which goes back to about 2000 BC, but comes forward to our times. And again, it's a kind of a product of becoming. It's a kind of an expanding temporal sort of reality, which is infused with the goddess. It's a tradition of divination, and it's a tradition that has a cosmology that develops behind it, so that there is a kind of a transcendent quality to it, but it is a imminent here and now divination of what we need to do that connects us. In a sense, I mean, if we are to equate it with some of the ideas or concepts in India, dharma, which is really like what is to be done here and now, that keeps us in harmony with all the other layers of reality. So this power of becoming that gives us unity, and that promotes the good for the individual and the good for the whole. Openness to that, and that those texts of Odu Ifa, they are infused with various aspects of goddess energy. And so that is what her work is about. The next essay is Neela Bhattacharya Saxena, and her essay and the third one, which is by June Wong, are both, they're very interestingly consonant. They both have to do with Tantra. Hers is a kind of heterodox Tantra, a Bengali Tantra, which crosses borders. There's Shaiva, Shakta, and Bodha, meaning Buddhist traditions all within it. She belongs to a kind of a living practice of that kind. And so this is what she's talking about, and she reads it in a specifically feminist manner, as a kind of a gynocentric, wisdom that she theorizes very beautifully, that essay. And June Wang is talking about Buddhist Tantra and of the Lahaul Spiti region in the Himalayan regions of India. And their Buddhist Tantra is infused with influences both from India as well as from China. And her essay is about the Dakinis as wisdom figures. The Dakinis, in a sense, are goddesses that are related to, again, the concept of prajna. Prajna, they belong to Mahayana texts called the Prajna Paramita texts. And both Neela Bhattacharya Saxena and June Wang are talking about this notion of prajna as wisdom that goes beyond jnana, or a kind of a trance existence that is transcendental. So this is a transcendence beyond the transcendence that becomes dynamic in our everyday action. It uses the transcendence to flow down, like Saraswati, flow down into us and make us into its embodiments. And so the various ways in which that comes about, I think these are some of the, I think there are two excellent, papers, that by June and that by Mara, that are talking about pilgrimages. So they are both personal in that sense. They're going to a particular place, and at the same time, they are practices. They're praxical as pilgrimages. And so very interesting, that itself as a form, I'd say, of feminine wisdom.
I should add that I failed to mention the most important part of Mara's essay is the pilgrimage that she made with students in women's spirituality to Anatolia, and the experience that they had there together and individually of that sacred space. And it brought in the whole question of what is sacred space. and they had a numinal experience trying to sort of rehear the revelation of those goddesses, but also in that particular place, which has a special power. I failed to say that before.
Yeah, I'd say the same for June, where, the place, except that, again, the earth radiance of the goddess in specific places of power, is sacred power, is very important in that essay as well.
That brings us to the last section of the book, which fields contemporary approaches to Sophia and the goddess traditions through the work of Carl Jung, Steiner, and Sri Aurobindo. This includes the essays by Debashish, Robert, and Stefan here, as well as William Keepin. You also, there's a mention of interspirituality, which arose due to the forced coexistence of mutual awareness of world spiritual traditions in modernity. So this is really situating and confronting these traditions in modernity. Can you speak a little bit about this paradigm shift and how these thinkers are part of that? Like the need for a holism, need for the feminine in life, and the need to think across borders and into interreligious ideas and concepts, and also in terms of evolution of consciousness, which is sort of shared by all of these thinkers that you're dealing with. Right.
Well, I can start with Will Keepin's work. The other night when Jake and I were interviewing Mark Andrus for his book on Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King, he just all of a sudden referred to interspirituality and Will Keepin, and he called my great friend. And I was, first of all, startled, but I was also thrilled because I think Will's work really is great. And it has two parts to it that complement each other. One is he and his wife Cynthia are the creators and directors of an enormous endeavor called Gender Equality Reconciliation International. So they give these workshops all over the world on gender reconciliation. It's very, very important work, which Mark was celebrating in his comments. But also Will on his own is one of the leaders of the interspirituality movement. He was a close friend and colleague of Father Thomas Keating, which Jake Sherman was also a close friend and colleague. And Will worked with Father Keating on these snowmass conferences on interspirituality. And I'd like to make a point, not to get polemical, but I do feel passionately about this. I'm not so happy with spiritual, not religious, as though they are mutually exclusive, when it's so obvious to me that they are complementary, and it hardly makes sense to have one without the other, since they come from each other in the most obvious way. And so Will's work is, as a leader of interspirituality, is to draw people from traditions that they're devoted to, that they don't abandon. That was one of the points that came up with Martin Luther King and Thich Nhat Hanh. Martin Luther King was really a Black Baptist preacher from Atlanta in the Ebenezer Church. And Thich Nhat Hanh was a monk in his monastery in Hue. They never stopped being that. And they also, out of that, in a quite wonderful, free, and or capacious way, they embrace these other traditions and all the truths and the rich spiritual richnesses, that's a funny word, that they hold. So I'm an advocate of that. I love the passage in Henri Bergson's book, Two Sources of Morality and Religion, where the mystic and the prophet comes out of the tradition, and then, like Joseph Campbell's hero, comes back in and contributes it. And then other people live off that sort of institutional, somewhat ordinary but necessary. So that's an important part of Will's work. If you are interested in it, I recommend his book called Belonging to God, a very deep and beautiful study of the belonging to God or Bhakti Yoga, really, in Christianity and Islam and Hinduism. So that's Will's essay.
So, Robert brings up actually an important issue, this whole issue of religious but not spiritual, and interspirituality related to that. And just to add a little more complexity to the issue, I think for many people today, religions no longer have any kind of roots. I mean, they don't have roots in religions. And it's not because they chose that. It's because of our times. I mean, it's largely because we are seeing what we call the modern is a rupture from the past for many people. Religions don't exist anymore for many people. And they're rediscovering, just like we are doing with the goddess traditions, there are traditions that are alive, but for many, it's a return. And that return includes a disappearance. So when we are talking about interspirituality, it's not necessarily that people have traditions and try to integrate other traditions into their own tradition. Many of these people have no traditions and they're creating new traditions. It's a synthesis. But I think what's really interesting and good about Will Keepin's article is that it's not a synthesis of ideas that have been devoided of their traditions. I think that's what's really important. I think hermeneutics, when we are actually looking at the past, has to enter into the way in which people have created their own images and ideas through the languages that they've made. And this is what he does. I think his synthetic traditions of interspirituality, which try to create inclusions where there has been exclusion, I think that's the value of his approach, are not traditions that kind of extract their figures out of their own tradition. It brings them with the richness of their own histories into his interspiritual synthesis. I think that's what's beautiful about his article.
I completely agree, Debashish. You put it well. Thank you.
Yeah. I'd also like to, Robert, I know, you might like to say a few words about, anthroposophy and the goddess in anthroposophy, but I'd like to say a few words about that to highlight your article.
Go right ahead.
Which is, I was surprised. I never knew that anthroposophy has such a close, relationship with the term Anthroposophia. And that in a sense is the very essence of anthroposophy. And Robert brings that out. He brings out the fact of the view of Rudolf Steiner, who's coming out of a theosophical background, but is a great mystic in his own right, with his own visionary understanding of the past, the present, and the future. So the way in which the goddess has traveled from, antiquity, from Isis, through what we called Sophia. So in a way, it takes the entire, the chapters or the sections of our book as its passage into the modern and the future. So I think, traveling through the Christian Sophia into the future. And anthroposophy, the term, is very inviting for me because it's the Sophia of the anthropos. And the anthropos, today we are actually talking about the exceeding of the human. We are talking about the problems of humanism and the movement towards post-humanism. But I think what he means by the anthropos is that he's talking about the human yet to come. And the human yet to come is the body of the goddess that we are forming in our movement into the future. It's the collective goddess who's taking shape. She's already there, inspiring our movement. And at the same time, she's taking shape as we exceed ourselves towards a integration, an integral being, so to say. Robert, I think I'll defer to you at this point.
I'm not going to say a word, Debashish. This is a wonderful summation and recommendation, and especially that it comes from you. So thank you. I'm delighted.
Well, then the other article is by Stefan. Stefan Julich has written on Carl Jung, and we've already talked about that. And that also has a historical element to it. That's what's beautiful about that last section. Because coming into our times, I wouldn't say this last section is contemporary. It is contemporary, but it is contemporary across a window that we call modern. And it's modern because all these figures belong to the 20th century. They belong to the first half of the 20th century. The Second World War is a watershed event for all these figures. And we find that what we see as the modern leading into the postmodern is a look back at history, a kind of interpretation. Each one of these is an interpretation of the past that opens up the doors to a certain future, because it's important to, at this point, to size up what we've been and where we want to go. So with Jung, we find that very interesting kind of trajectory of history, where what we are talking about, in a sense, as the disappearance of the goddess and the appearance, in a way, of the anthropos, of the human, of the male, of the androcentric anthropos. In a way, he's actually looking at it as the emergence of the individual. I know that Olina has just completed her PhD. She's Dr. Olina Provencher, and that was an important part of her art historical dissertation. The way in which, in Jungian terms, there has been a certain kind of transition out of the amorphous oneness that we experienced in the body, in the belly in the womb of the Divine Mother, to a emergence of individuality, and that itself having two phases: a phase in which it assimilates the power of that from which it emerges and then becomes deficient. And we are moving, as it were, into the deficient phase. That's the phase that Jung is talking about, that we are into right now, entering into the great wars of the 20th century, and going further into a kind of a dystopia, which we are living right now. And the call in it, really, for a transition to a new age. He sees it astrologically as the transition from the Piscean age to the age of Aquarius, heralded by the appearance of the Antichrist, who is all around us right now, and also heralded by the presence of the Sun Woman, the goddess, who is calling us to an integral future. So I think in that sense, it's the great prophetic insights of modern thinkers that brings us into our contemporary phase that particular section tries to evoke. The other article is by myself. Maybe Robert can say a few words, but I would only like to highlight the same notion of history in it, the idea of Vijnana. So, we've seen these terms like pragya, for example, a very important term in tantric thought. The idea of Vijnana, both of them have that root jna to it, pragya, Vijnana. And neither of them are jnana. in the transcendental sense, that you have knowledge when you enter into a trance that erases everything. This is another kind of knowledge. And this term Vijnana makes its appearance in modern times in Bengal in the speech of the Bengali tantric mystic Sri Ramakrishna. He's the one who first starts talking about Vijnana. And what is Vijnana? Vijnana is again contextualized in our times by the fact that we live in plural times. We live in times where even spirituality, we're talking about participatory spirituality, for example. There's no one kind of spirituality. There's no one, sort of perennialism is not a kind of a single experience that people have. World traditions have emerged into the vistas of God, the infinite vistas of God. And we stand on the threshold of trying to make sense of that. And our easiest answer is it's all one, but it isn't so easily assimilated to a one. This is the whole notion of Vijnana. Vijnana is a kind of a perspectival vanishing point, which we have not reached. And we cannot reach it so long as we are in the mind, because the mind is subject to the law of logic that takes the notion of, if this is true, anything other than this cannot be true. What we are talking about is either or what Neela calls androcentric thinking. This is the entire notion of androcentric thinking. So what people like Ramakrishna and Sri Aurobindo are talking about is that there is a state, just in a way, what the tantrics are calling prajna. There is a state outside of this duality between the one and the infinite, where you have the one and infinite that coexist as an experience, not only had in trance, but as our normal everyday consciousness, as our waking consciousness. So this call to the future of the evolution of the anthropos to a post-human that we are not yet, we can't even define it at this point, is what we are trying to end this with in terms of the vision of Sri Aurobindo.
Well, we're supposed to be ending at this point on the clock, but I do want to add just very briefly how Debashish and I have this, you heard his wonderful account of Rudolf Steiner, but and anthroposophy, but we also have this very deep spiritual commitment, his deeper and prior. Well, no, I was there first, but anyway, thanks to Debashish, with whom I went to Pondicherry and to Auroville, not for the first time, certainly, but for the first time with such consequence. I came back, and practically my first deed on arriving was writing an essay on the mother, which I would like to figure out a way to put in this book that we're writing, Sri Aurobindo and Modern Thought. We might or we might not, but it doesn't change that in terms of this this book. If Debashish had not written on Sri Aurobindo and the mother, I would have, because I do believe that she is a manifestation of Shakti, and that is to say, it's somehow, in a way that I don't understand, a permeation of matter, including the architecture, including the creation of a city that has to do with money, sex, power, and every important challenge that she has worked through in her amazing life as an esotericist, an occultist, a spiritual teacher. And we should take seriously when Sri Aurobindo says the mother's consciousness and mine are one and the same. And I've learned from Debashish how much Sri Aurobindo learned from the mother with respect to the integral yoga. So anyone who's looking for spiritual direction or insight or intuition and practical application, I recommend that great combination of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. And Debashish was saying with a little bit of regret that these figures are all first half of the 20th century, well, Jung a little past, but I think that some of them are figures that are so vast and so profound that we have not yet implemented them. You know, they're past, but we're not past where they were. So we really have to keep working with them. And I don't know what you all want to do about our time, but we were going to be ending around this time. So I leave it to you. I see this chat. I want to thank Matt Switzer for putting the link for the Jake and my interview with Bishop Mark Andrus. That's the first chat. And then here comes, so I shouldn't be doing that. You guys do it.
Well, we had thought of maybe having one more section, but we're obviously over time. And I think that you kind of covered what we had thought that we would talk about. So I thought maybe we would open it up for questions. We have a lot of messages that are just expressing the gratitude and joy and the celebration of the publication. But may we open it up for questions from people who are here? Is that okay?
Absolutely, Stefan. And, you know, many of our contributors are here. This is a wonderful opportunity to have them say a few words as well about, you know, their work, which is so special and specific. So, yeah, yes, whoever wants to ask questions to any of us.
And you can put them into
welcome.
the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll take them. I do see a couple have come up. Let's see. Somebody has asked where the book can be purchased right now.
So there is a purchase form. I think Jonathan can send it to you. Right now, it's not yet on Amazon. In fact, today it's being shipped. I just sent Robert the news. It was held up. We finished the book a long time back. All our contributors know they've been waiting for a long time. I think in July we were done. By September, everything was done. But it's COVID time, and so we have to, you know, wait for everything. And I was given a date of 17th November, and serendipitously we didn't take that date. We took 2nd of December for this book release, and just 2 days back I was told that the book is ready. It's in print, and today it's shipping. So it's literally, today is literally the release. We don't have the book in hand, but it's present.
Right, and Jonathan has just sent Jonathan, that's what the people should use to buy. I hope people don't buy this book from Amazon. Please, could everybody try to do everything possible to avoid Amazon whenever possible and buy from the publisher? Please, let's, you know, these are small deeds, but in terms of consciousness, they're very important.
So it's Lotus Press. And, you know, yeah, I think Jonathan can send you, all those present here get a 10% discount. You can write directly to them, email them, and, you know, just mention that you're part of this, you're writing after this event, and they can tell you how to, you know, pay and receive the book.
Some very nice expressions of gratitude and support. I haven't shared this, so it's probably inappropriate for me to say it, but I'm going to. I would like Debashish, you and I, and all of the contributors to have a conference, a Zoom conference that people could watch.
Thank you, Robert. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think it'll be a great sharing. So we'll work towards it.
Okay. I mean, here I've added, there are 9 contributors on this call. Well, we just need a few more. We'll have everybody. So let's do that.
I do see a question from Mara Mar. Did you want to come online and ask it? It's just question from Mara ...
Right, I would like to come online and ask. I've thoroughly enjoyed everything that's been said here, and I wish we had time for the last section, but I think a conference is an excellent idea for continuing and deepening and extending the conversations. I was struck, I want to say, at the very beginning in the introduction between, I'm just picking up two threads here, but on the one hand and on the far end of the spectrum of possibilities and potentiality was Robert's comment of the Sophia Project helping mothers and children at risk for homelessness. Very grounded, down to earth, practical, good, wise manifestation of embodied spirituality that's serving the greater good and helping especially mothers and children who are among the most vulnerable. So I hold that in one hand. And then Debashish talking about postmodernism and the end of metaphysics. Well, there was the death of God, you know, a century ago, and then there was now the death of philosophy and the end of metaphysics, and we know end of meta-narratives, and no worldviews and no larger pictures and no roadmaps to anywhere because nobody seems to know where to be going. And also then you mentioning this being the kind of philosophical gateway to fascism. So on the one hand, caring for homeless mothers and children, and on the other hand, the concern for how to do something philosophically, spiritually, religiously, metaphysically to prevent the growth of fascism. That's what I feel is this vast field of potential that you've raised for us in our minds and consciousness and imagination today. And that's a tremendous amount of spaciousness there. I just feel that my wish for your book is that we can address that whole range of concerns that you raise up there at the beginning, because they're both so urgent, from the personal to the political. You know, what feminists have been saying, personal is political, and we need to bring them together. And how do we care for the most vulnerable, whether it's the children and the mothers or the elderly or those who are most sick or poor or, you know, disadvantaged by being people of color or of different genders and so forth. How do we address that? So our culture has been profoundly lacking in wisdom and getting worse every day as far as I can see. And, you know, we just have to bring more wisdom forward, and each one of us can do that. And I feel that, you know, this offering today, and I trust the book, the whole book itself, will be able to advance not only the conversation, but the practical doing of carrying us forward to a more peaceful, loving, compassionate, and generous and just, ecologically sustainable future. So I'm thankful for that. I don't think there's a question there, just a comment.
Yeah, so, Mara, I wanted to, sorry about that, but I just wanted to acknowledge something, you know, which I'm so glad that you spoke up, that one of the kind of streams that have fertilized my mind towards even the title Philo-Sophia is a talk that I heard you give way back in one of the the founder symposiums on Diotima. And that's what I approached you about initially. But you've written a delightful, large work on that, which I hope to see in print. soon. But that was a great talk, and that was a great inspiration. The whole idea of Philo-Sophia, in a way, I wish we could have added that chapter, but I think it was too big to add as a chapter. But what you've given us is wonderful also.
Oh, thank you. Well, this was inspiring today, but I just wanted to ask Annette, since you're there, about and what all you have said. We all experience Sophia from a different perspective and place. So I was wondering if Annette might tell us something about the cosmological wisdom of Sophia from the Yoruba tradition.
Thank you, Mara. Mara is my mentor and nudger. So from the Yoruba perspective, one of the challenges I had when first coming to this work and first being invited to contribute is that within the Yoruba mythology and cosmology, there is not a goddess per se of wisdom. There is a god of wisdom, Orunmila, who's very much tied up with the divination system. But behind Orunmila, like, where does Orunmila's wisdom come from? So that's going behind Orunmila. That's where the wisdom of the sacred feminine comes in the form of what's termed as Iami. And part of the challenge with bringing a lot of that wisdom forward is that Yoruba is what has been, the knowledge and the wisdom has been transmitted orally, and it's forever changing and adapting to situations and to time. So when it did start to be translated, it was in the mid-19th century, and the Christian Missionary Society were the translators. So with all the colonial background, colonial history, the disparaging of indigenous traditional practices and religions, that was quite problematic. So it was just very difficult to go back and to reap into this and to regather the teachings and the wisdom. But one of the key elements for the Yoruba is a complementarity and is a balance between the male and female principles, which is extremely important. And it goes through the divination system. It's represented in the mythologies, and there are many, many stories and I can go into, but all cutting it short, that the primordial feminine and the wisdom of the feminine is of great importance, and it's primary and has great primacy, although it's not the first thing you see when you discuss wisdom, because the one up front is the male deity, Orunmila. I leave it there.
Annette, I haven't had the chance to read your piece, but I'm wondering if there's been a discussion of kind of the evolution of all of this and where it might be going, and I'm wondering in the Yoruba tradition if there's any discussion of that. What happens moving forward?
Moving forward for our time. For our
time, yeah.
It all goes back to the essence of complementarity and balance. Finding a way to live in balance with all of creation, what's seen and what's unseen. And the vehicle for doing that and for knowing when you're out of balance and how to get back into balance is through Oduifa, which is the scripture behind the divination system. So that is basically the answer, and because the text is reinterpreted given the time and the situation. It takes the wisdom of the practitioner to bring that together for individual use, and how best they can express that in their daily lives and in the lives of those around them to make a difference for themselves and others. I'm speaking about it, and for me, it sounds very abstract because it's a very, very detailed system with a lot of specificity. we're talking, all the discussions here have been very abstract and speaking about broad philosophies and very heady. And the Yoruba are extremely practical people. They're extremely pragmatic. So the system is very pragmatic, very down to earth. What do I do today for myself, for my community, to make our lives better? Am I living, the highest principle for the Yoruba is Iwa Pele, which is good character. How am I living in good character? How am I doing that? And what happens around you will show you if you're out of balance. If you basically know if things aren't working, you're out of balance. So you go to your, to the practitioner and you say, okay, things are out of balance. What do I do? And you have a reading, and you get guidance.
I want to suggest that since I just read several endorsements for this idea of a conference for the contributors, we don't have to continue past our plan because there will be another night when we will start over again and everybody will be able to participate. Debashish, what do you think?
Sure. But yeah, I'm if people have any other questions, I can take a few more questions, or others can take a few more questions. Yeah, thank you, Annette, for that. I was also struck by, the way in which you bring in the goddess, or bring in the goddess wisdom forms from both from the kind of more, you talk about the highest layer, which is more, in a way, ungendered almost. And then you talk about this this power, which in Indian terms would almost be called Shakti, like you're saying, the power behind the male god of divination. And then the divination form itself, which is morphing over and adding over time. I think that's a very interesting thing because it's not fixed, right? And it's constantly adding, and that's what makes it contemporary. There's a sort of a vision of the here and now and the tomorrow that's constantly being added to it.
Right. You have a basic 256 texts, and then to that there's always additions.
Right. And then I think in your article, you're also talking about the necessity for the power of the priestess or the power of the female diviner in this process that yes. Needs to be acknowledged.
If I could jump in here, this is William Keepan. I just want to say, first of all, how grateful I am to be part of this community and appreciate that I could join here at the end. But I want to say to what you said, Annette, I'm just so thrilled by what you're saying, because it seems to me, regardless of how we ascribe the gender dichotomy in any of the traditions, the key and the core is the balance, because the balance is that dynamic living communion that has to be sustained moment to moment, age to age. If it gets out of balance and stays out of balance, then things go awry. And regardless of how we conceptualize the divine feminine and the divine masculine, and it does vary. Chokhmah, for example, is a feminine verb in Hebrew, but Chokhmah in the Kabbalah is a masculine sephiro. Bina is the feminine. So the masculine and feminine associations, as we all know, can be moved around, because in some sense, each of them contains all of them, because it's kind of a fractal containment. But the balance is a fundamental kind of dynamic communion of the two, moment to moment.
And that's reflected in Odu Ifak also in its construction, that's actual construction. So it's, yeah.
So that's just beautiful, because that's maybe the principle that's universal across the traditions, is the essential need for that balance. In Islam, they have Jamal and Kamal coming together, Jamal and Jalal coming together, creating Kamal, which is perfection, which is essentially the balance of the 99 names of God, the female half and the male half, so to speak. So again, I wonder, and it's just coming to me now, if that balance is something that could emerge as a profound principle that's found across all these traditions. Yeah.
I have a question here in the chat. This is anonymous, actually. Curious if Simon Magnus and Helena make an appearance in the book and the implications of Christianity demonizing the couple who embodied an incarnational spirituality. Not sure who wants to answer that.
Stefan?
I'm not sure. Can you repeat the question, Jonathan? Simon Magus and
Helena, if they are in any of the essays, and the implications of how Christianity demonized them as a couple who embodied incarnational spirituality.
I don't address this in the piece on Jung, although it's definitely there in Jung's work. I don't know if any of the other essays, I mean, Debashish or Robert would know if it was present. This is more or less kind of a Gnostic or even a magical, idea. It's come down as a shadow tradition or an alternate tradition, the tradition that lost, that was kind of defeated by the empire, the Christian empire. So it's definitely still present. Craig, Craig might have written about this. Craig Chalquist, who has studied Gnosticism very deeply, and it might be interesting to go to his work and take a look at it. But I couldn't answer this.
No, I don't think we have anything on it. The book has many absences. Of course, it's not meant to be a encyclopedic kind of work on the goddess. It feels certain ideas, certain specific traditions, and it has absences in it as well.
If there's no more questions, last chance. Then maybe we can just have closing remarks from the two of you. Thank you so much for being with us, Robert and Debashish today, and all the other contributors and everybody else that's been with us in a fantastic, almost a couple hours spent together. But I think that this idea of a conference is definitely it's feeling very real right now. I'd love to do what I can to make that happen. But maybe we could end with some closing remarks. Thanks, Stefan, as well for co-hosting this with me.
Jonathan is lobbying for the conference to be in Oroville.
That's good. That's good stuff. No, I have no closing conference comments except to recommend the conference, which the four of us and maybe some others will create. So I'm already there.
Thank you. No closing comments from me either.
Yeah, I think that everyone who participated has exhibited great endurance, and we're grateful to you all.
Yes, thanks everybody.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Jonathan
you very
and
much.
Stephen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neela.
The conference is next.
Yes, yes. Look forward to that.
Yes.
Me too. Very much so.